Major League Journeymen. We are joined by the handsomest coach in the Eastern Conference. Do you get that a lot, Noons? Probably not, but we are joined
Nope.
by Pat Noonan, and we got Dax McCarty. Gordo's joining us whenever he gets around to it. But we're
Is he? Is he? The questions are being
Well,
asked.
that's true. We are rolling the dice as we do weekly with Gordo, but I think he's going to join us. My money is on yes. But we actually may be able to talk a little bit about soccer before he joins us, so he doesn't slow this thing down. Noons, first and foremost, thank you for jumping on the pod. I think that it's been fun to watch Cincinnati evolve, and you've been a big piece of that. The evolution, along with your staff, along with Chris Albright, along with the players, and the city as a whole. We chatted a little bit about this earlier, but just a small market team doing big market things. Can you chat just a little bit about the philosophy of the organization and kind of what drew you, I think, out of Philadelphia to take a big step as a first-time head coach, and why Cincinnati felt like the right fit?
Well, we got a ambitious ownership group. They want to win, and it's obviously tough to compete with some of the bigger markets when you're trying to attract top talent. And so when you look at the stadium, our facilities, I think our stadiums, this is obviously a biased opinion, is the best in the league. We have an amazing training facility. So, when we're looking at recruitment and you're talking about bringing in big name players and trying to take top talents away from some of these other markets, there has to be something to draw them to Cincinnati, and our facilities are some of the best. And so that ambition with those facilities, with our willingness to spend, shows that we want to win championships. And so I think that's allowed us to go and recruit in a really aggressive way. And you mentioned Chris. Him and his team do an incredible job of trying to go out and find the right talent, the right fit for how we want to play for this market, because not every top talent makes sense in Cincinnati. And you mentioned, what was the draw to Cincinnati? I'm a first-time head coach. I'm not going to be able to go and pick, whatever opportunity I want, having had no success as a head coach. So I've been around the league a long time, like you two, and you've seen, some of these stadiums, some of the, setups. And when I go into this interview process, I'm seeing all of this and thinking, okay, if we can get the on-field product right, we're going to be set up for some success, and we're going to be set up to go and do some special things. And, that's our that's what we're searching for. And I think we've achieved some of that. We're still hungry for a lot more, but that's what drew me to this opportunity, on top of course, saying, you know what, I can't just say I'm going to wait for the right opportunity. This was a really unique opportunity. And, from the interview process and how I, saw things with the ownership and how I knew going into it, I was going to have a relationship with Chris Albright, and we were going to be able to hit the ground running. All those things matter, and all those things, I think, set us up for some early success.
You're talking about the interview process, and I know that you can't give yourself a pat on the back because that's not the type of guy you are. I will give you a pat on the back. I think that your name was certainly considered in a lot more than just FC Cincinnati, and from staff, coaches, assistants, guys that are, around the league. And certainly, conversations that we have, as in just former players, people that love the league and commentate on the league, have certainly considered you as a great option to be a head coach while you were with the national team under Bruce, with his staff, both in LA and also in with the national team, and then in Philly again with Jim, and you've had an opportunity to learn, I think, from some pretty significant individuals and mentors. But the interview process specifically to take you to Cincinnati, it is a big step. That is a big step because I don't know if you're giving yourself enough credit that that's maybe, this is a big mark on your career, right? And you had to have, I think, a lot of interest, and certainly thought process in narrowing it down to make sure that that was a good step for you, just like any player, right? Like we've talked a little bit about this. We've talked a lot about this as players that come into environments. You get drafted and you're at the mercy of what that environment is. A little bit different, but also probably similar in terms of, okay, the job that's open is this or that, and am I going to take it or am I not? What was the deciding factor for you where you were like, okay, I am ready to take a step here to be a head coach, and I want to drive this ship?
Well, I was fortunate enough to go through the process a few times prior and realize in some of those interviews, how far I had to go as far as articulating my idea. Okay, this is what I want things to look like on the field, off the field. And so the interview process is important in knowing how you portray yourself, how you talk about your ideas, your philosophy, all these things to a GM, to an ownership group. And the first couple rounds of that were, they were okay. I left, feeling okay. Maybe I didn't give them the best version of myself or my ideas. And then going into the FCC interview process, part of it was, that a level of comfort was Chris. And so we'd worked together and I knew what the GM was like as a person and how he, saw the game and what kind of leader he was. And so I think that helped. But then also when I sat down and got to be face-to-face with Carl, meet some of the other owners, these are really good people. And I've already spoken about the ambition. They wanted to win. That was important. I talk about, the things that motivate me and why I do this. It's winning championships. It's the relationships. It's player development, player and team development. And so when you have an ownership group that, excuse me, you can see is hungry to go and win, that's exciting. And so all of those things kind of came together in the interview process. And I think in the end is what, allowed this to play out the way it has. And so, I'm really thankful. I think this is, a really good group, a really good, setup from the top down. Ownership that cares, that values the city, the fan base, the pursuit of success, the relationship with Jeff Birding, with Chris Albright, all the way down to myself, the coaching staff, the players. It feels connected, and that's important because that's hard to find. Yeah, and I think that's what's allowed us to continuously improve and be hungry and not settle for some of the early successes that we had that weren't the end goal. The end goal wasn't to just make the playoffs. The end goal is to win championships and to put FCC on the map. And I think we're still in the process of that, but up to this point, I'm very pleased with what we've been able to accomplish.
Noons, we're seeing a first here on the Journeymen podcast. We're about 10 minutes into this, and yours truly hasn't even been able to get a word in, which Dan will be able to tell you that's a miracle at this point in time. And so
breaking new ground here.
I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but anyways, I want to say, like, just listening to your process, and it feels like listening to your growth as a coach. It sounds like your philosophy as a coach is pretty similar to how you were as a player. I just listening to you speak and the humility with which you speak and the credit that you give others and the synergy that you're looking for in terms of what you wanted. It's no surprise to me that you guys are having as much success as you're having with your tenure. And I think it speaks to ownership, doing their due diligence, your relationship with Chris Albright, and then the staff that you surrounded yourself with that I think probably balances out maybe some of your weaknesses with strengths of others, and it just is fantastic. And then it shouldn't be lost on people that this is an organization that came into MLS, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, took home 3 consecutive wooden spoons for being the worst team in the league. And so the turnaround, it shouldn't, like, we shouldn't over exaggerate how stark the turnaround has been under you and your leadership. And I can't give you enough credit and enough flowers.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I wanted to go deeper in terms of player personnel with Cincinnati because, as you know, I'm a big time analyst now, and I've got to watch.
Oh, I know.
I've got to watch all the games and all the teams. And last year, I thought you guys probably had enough to make a run to MLS Cup, but one area where I felt like you guys fell a little bit short was in the striker position. And right. I want to get into Kevin Denke a little bit and your process of how you got to him, but you were playing Orejano, Kubo, not as much Kevin Kelsey, who I think probably you expected a little bit more from last year up top. And
right.
It seemed to me like that piece was the biggest missing piece, other than obviously the stuff that that happened with Lucho, which we come to a little bit later. This is more focused on the strikers and Denke.
Right.
I'm curious because Kevin Kelsey, you know, he scored, I think, on his debut against my Atlanta United team, and he seemed like he was going to be a handful. Can you just go through the process of what happened in terms of what you saw with him and why maybe you guys didn't think it would work out with him in Cincy, and then what led you to Denke, who for us in the studio has been a top tier striker signing, not just because he can score goals, but everything else that he adds, his hold up play, his feet, his link up play, the way he combines his work rate, all of it is just top level. So maybe you could just go into the striker discourse a little bit and what your process was from last year to this year.
Yeah, well, just going back to last year, and you mentioned it, you know, part of our struggles as a team was, you know, the final product. I think we had a good group. We obviously, up until the midway point when we lost Matt and Nick, our back line took a hit, and our team took a hit with, you know, losing the leadership, vocal leadership, on-field performances. And so, you know, we were putting a Band-Aid over some of the things that, you know, we were experiencing, and we got through it, I think, in a pretty good way. Guys put their head down and worked. But even when we got that defensive stuff right, in the attack, I think what we lacked was a consistent goal scorer. You know, and you mentioned Kevin Kelsey, and he was an interesting piece for us because he's a really good kid, and he's a hard worker, and he's mature for his age. I think what it came down to was, you know, the number and what that purchase price was going to be. And so there was some uncertainty around that. And, you know, in the end, we decided to swing big. And that's why Kevin Denke is here. But, you know, Kevin Kelsey was great to work with. And I think there were areas that we were able to improve him on or with, and then there was areas that I felt we were coming up short, and just getting our 9 position to run harder in front of goal, whether it was to score, whether it was to be unselfish and open space for their teammates. You know, we were a little bit off in the consistency of that, and then the experience and the quality of the final product, because Kevin's an unproven number 9 in a lot of ways. Yeah. But you can see the upside. And so I think that's where maybe, you know, we lacked a little bit with him. And then we had Nico Gioacchini at the end of the year, and that was kind of a deadline, you know, day move, which all parties understood why we were doing it. But there were a couple things that fell through the cracks, and those guys were important pieces for us. And so going into the, you know, off season, we felt it was the right move to look elsewhere. And with Kevin Denke, that's Chris and our scouting department, and how we recruit, and how we we utilize data. And it's not the end all, but how we use it to kind of find and filter players to how we want to play. And this was unique in the sense that you rarely get a player of his age that's accomplished what he has as a top striker, in Europe to a top goal scorer and bring him to MLS. So that was one, the data, and then two, getting in front of the player and trying to sell FCC to him and why this would work for him at this stage of his career. And certainly I'm very pleased that we were able to get that over the line, but it was a long process. And he's just such a unique player as far as his professionalism, his routine. It's unlike any I've seen. How he takes care of himself, how he approaches the game. I know you've probably heard it's been made public about, he likes chess, and it's always for him about how he connects the pieces and how he thinks about the game, and that's how he thinks about his teammates. And we still have a long way to go, but he's a really good pro. And you always hear these stories about Ronaldo and his process of how he prepares himself to compete at the highest level. Where, well, I'm not comparing the two, but I'm saying his routine and how he goes about his day to day. I mean, he's got a really unique schedule throughout the day of how he prepares himself for training, post training, recovery. All of it is pretty special. So a great teammate. Obviously a top goal scorer that I think we can unlock so many more things in his game outside of just scoring goals to help us, in the end go and compete for championships. But yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying it was the Chris and his team and the recruitment process with the data, and then just getting in front of guys. And I think once we get in front of some players, I think we have a good way of selling FCC and our team and getting some top young prospects to our club.
Gargs, I don't know if you saw this, but Denke scored a bicycle kick game winner this weekend.
I did. What a goal.
And speaking to Noons, talking about this guy's process, he took his shirt off and it didn't look like any of us. Okay. His muscles actually had muscles popping out of the muscles. It's a little spooky, but
that's one of our jokes. I remember when we first met him, and you give him like a pat on the back, the shoulders. I'm like, well, that's what
different. Is that? What's that thing in there? What are you hiding back there?
What's going on there? Because I don't have that.
I don't have one of those. Noons, you, I think I've been around you for a long time as a player, and also got to play under you as a coach, and you've always been a big piece of culture, setting a standard, and those things. So it doesn't really, I guess, it's not something that's foreign in the way that you set your team up and the way that you, I would say, run your locker room or oversee your locker room. And you had kind of mentioned his process and a true professional. The guy that I always point to that I learned a bunch from in terms of being a professional was Pablo, and the way that he was somewhat maniacal about his body, and both in the best ways and the most lunatic ways, as Pablo is, right? But the comparison that I want to draw there is when you have that type of individual, people feed off of that stuff, right? And people see it and then they learn. And this is obviously, 15 years ago when I was coming into the league, or 20 years ago when I was coming to the league and seeing what the next level looked like. You guys made a massive change in your organization in moving Lucho along, right? A generational MLS talent. Can you just talk through a little bit about the process that you guys went through in getting to that decision? Like, who is it? What do those conversations look like? Who's included in those conversations? And how do you get to a finish line to say, like, okay, yeah, we're gonna move on?
Yeah, it was stressful. It wasn't, the plan. I think it kind of started, when we got knocked out by NYC, and, he had some comments, about this might be the end for him with the club. And that, that surprised us. It felt like in the moment, maybe it was the emotions getting the best of him. And so, throughout the rest of that off season, there was enough there that had us, thinking about moving on and what does life look like with our club without, Lucho with the team. And so, fast forward to the beginning of preseason, and obviously he doesn't show up, and there was intent there. Of course, it's disappointing, and I don't want this to become, a lot of negative around Lucho, because it was he's the reason that we're in the position we are as a club with everything that he helped us accomplish on the field and growing as a leader and as a captain. But it was unfortunate. And, so in the preseason, the early weeks of preseason, there were conversations around a transfer. And so that was, pretty public. And that's something that we, I think our hand was forced in saying, we can't just be expecting this to turn out where Lucho returns. We need to have a plan. And, that's obviously Evander. And so those two moves happened so close together where we weren't sure how or where Lucho was going to end up, because it was, pretty clear at that point that it wasn't going to be with our club. But, we moved him to Dallas, and then within 2 days, I think, the Evander deal happened. So it was a stressful time because you're losing such an important piece, but we're an ambitious club and we want to make sure that we're prepared. And, that just shows to the work that Chris and his team did to be able to get Evander done so soon after, and, kind of close one chapter, open a new one, and say, okay, this shows the intent that we want to win, but also it's going to take a little bit of time, even though we get an amazing player in Evander into the group. Well, he's, coming off of a tough end with his club in a very similar fashion in Portland. And so now it was, let's get him up to speed. But we were, I think, a week out from, or, 10 days out from our Champions Cup game. And so now you're trying to get this new important piece up to speed with, Kevin Denke, and then Luca was coming, Orshana was coming back into the mix.
Right.
And so it was just game after game after game. And it was just a lot right away that, I don't think we were able to really strengthen a lot of these relationships and these key pieces early on with the connections, because we just went straight into the games with the timing of it.
Jeez,
and so
you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty there within
it was
those planning, that planning. Lot. Is there a plan? Is there a plan B that's discussed there? Like, because realistically, Evander, for us, I think Dax and I both agree here. What an incredible signing, but also, like, you're dealing with a player that, realistically, I don't think anybody in the league expected to move out of Portland after the year that he had, until he basically says, "Piss off, Portland, I'm out." And then all of a sudden, it's, oh, okay, well, there's a house on fire here too. And Cincinnati capitalizes. But what if, I know what ifs are a bunch of bullshit, but what if that isn't there? Like, was there a plan B that you guys discussed?
There was, but he was our top target. And, we felt confident we could get it over the line. But if it didn't happen, our conversations, and I think you asked this earlier, what does the recruitment look like? Chris and his team, they're going to, use the data and use, our last 4 years together to go and find the right players. But then there's always dialogue of, where we are, what we need to improve our group. So that collaboration and communication is constant. And if we weren't able to get the Evander deal done, what I said to Chris and what we were on the same page was we're not going to force a signing in this moment if we don't think it's the right fit. And so if that wasn't to have worked out, we were going into the regular season and into that Champions Cup with the group we had, minus Evander. And we were, going to work hard to make it work. So there was going to probably not be another option at that time, because we didn't feel the next, option available was the right fit.
Right. You didn't need to force it.
We weren't going to force it. And, that's, again, we got the piece we wanted, but it was, the plan B was, let's go into the start of the season, and this is the group we have, and this is what we're going to work with, but we don't want to miss on this piece. And I think we feel really good about who we have.
I know what your plan B was, because you have a ridiculous player in Luca Orajano that you just plug
Yeah.
and play pretty much anywhere. So
Man, he's
Right.
fun to watch.
I know you were just going to play him as a 10, so that's fair. That's just my unknowledgeable opinion. But Nunes, I want to say, like, I can say this now because I'm just a dumb talking head who just says dumb stuff all the time. I'm sorry for everything Lucho Acosta did for your club, for the wonderful player that he is. He's older than Evander. And in my opinion, it's addition by subtraction. I know you can't go into that, fair enough, but I want to acknowledge how good he was for you guys while also acknowledging, in my opinion, you got a better player. And of course, it costs you more money, but you bring in Evander now to partner with Orejano and Denke, and it just, I mean, you guys got to be, once that deal goes through, you've got to be sitting there high-fiving each other like, dang, look at what we just did. But I do want to say, you guys are top of the East, 5-game winning streak, and us in the studio are sitting here looking around saying, Cincinnati hasn't even played that well. And maybe you would disagree with that notion, but in my opinion, I'm watching you guys and I'm thinking they're not even scratching the surface of what I consider their top potential to be. And I know the Matt Miazga injury was a big, big loss, and I can give Matt shit because he was a teammate of mine, but I would never in a million years think he would get burned in the way that he did against Hugo Kuipers, I believe it was. I got to tell him that. But I know when he comes back and gets fully fit, that's going to be such a massive piece to what you guys are doing in terms of just getting better, right? And it seems like just been stop-start. You've had Wobodo injured. You've had Buka miss a few games. You've had Evander miss a few games. And I'd argue you guys haven't even played even close to the top of your potential right now. So this is a long-winded way of saying, can you go into maybe the differences between Evander and Lucho in your eyes? And then also, once you guys hit your top level, I mean, what's the ceiling for this team?
Yeah. No, good questions. Looking at the two players, I think we're replacing an MVP with another MVP, caliber player, and so I would say the differences are because there's so many similarities. A little bit on both sides of the ball, pressing and then just decision making with the ball. Lucho loved the final pass. He loved. He had such creativity and he would take, I think, more risk is what I would say. And so when that worked out, you saw it. There was the spectacular, whether it was the goals or the assist. I think 1v1 dribbling, he was just in these spaces where there was 2-3 defenders. Somehow he's coming out of these, duels and 1v1, 1v2 moments. Where all of a sudden, we're attacking the goal, and you're just like, I don't know how he did that. So those are some of the things that stood out with Lucho. With Evander, I think it's just how smooth he is. Different with the ball as far as how he shifts defenders, and then you saw the goal against Chicago, and he's not hitting top speeds, but his change of speed and the timing and how he gets a defender off balance to know. This is the touch, and this is the speed that I need to be able to beat this defender. It's he makes it look really easy, and so that's where I think the 1v1, the change of speed looks different with the two players. I think Evander probably takes a little bit less risk as far as the final pass, but they both have the vision. They both have the creativity to unlock the opponent and a defense. So I would say defensively, Lucho was he was so sneaky in his pressure, and we ask a lot of our first line of pressure, and both of those players Lucho had a key role, Evander has a key role, but he was very sneaky in how he would bait the opponent into certain passes, whether it was by design or whether it was his own feel of the moment.
It's very interesting you called him sneaky, because as a 6 that had to play against him a bunch of times, I would try to do a good 6 thing and I would be scanning over my shoulder and I wouldn't see him. He's such a little guy. And then he would be picking my pocket and putting you guys in on a counterattack. And so maybe that's just a poor number 6, but I would argue yes.
Don't sell yourself short, man. We know the player you are.
Sneaky is a great way to describe him. He was
sneaky and he was shifty, and with Evander, he's putting in He's put in the work. You can see his game understanding and how when we ask certain pressing ideas, he's engaged and he's smart. And so, those I don't love comparing sometimes because they're different types of players and they're both number 10s and they're both high profile, but they're both special players. I will say that. And it was amazing working with Lucho. It's been fun working with Evander. So, as a coach, to be able to work with a player of that at that level of that caliber it speaks to our ownership group and our ambition. But the second question that you asked about, I think, was about our team and just am I satisfied? No, and I'm probably overcritical of our group because we have a really strong group. Mentality's been great. They love coming into work every day and being around each other. But I try to look past just the wins and losses. Where are we at? How are we performing? And not saying because we've won 5 games that we're a great team. I don't think we're anywhere close. And I tell these guys that. Nick Haglund joked to me before we met in the gym the other day because he goes, "All right, what are you what weren't you happy with in this game that we're going to hear about?" And so they know I'm not just going to look at the win and say you guys were great. I thought stretches of the game we did some really good things, but then what I continue to tell them, when you guys play simple, forget the pieces, because I know Evander's special and Kevin's special in certain ways and Luke is special. We talk about these guys, but when everybody plays simple and does their job, we're a really good team.
Yeah.
When guys try to do too much, when Evander tries to do too much, when Luca tries to do much, when Kevin and they force the issue, when our defenders try to break pressure in the wrong moments, in the wrong ways, every team is going to cause us problems. And that's kind of what you're seeing where the reason I think we're able to be in the position we are as far as results is because of the mentality and how we defend the ball. Because we've been put into too many transition moments and had to defend the box in really difficult ways where the mentality of how we, have success in those moments has been excellent. And we can't rely on that moving forward all the time because teams are going to figure that out and they're going to make us pay. So that's where I think, we've struggled and where we need to improve, but it's a great
Pat,
group
can I interrupt you there? Because I think
Yeah.
you talked about a really important thing that I'd be really interested to hear you speak about is how you get through to a player and convince him to play within himself. Because I think all of us as players aspire to do more, aspire to be more of whatever they're responsible within their team, get paid more, all the things.
Yeah.
When in reality, as long as you're being the best version of yourself, you're going to make the most impact within your team. How do you get through to guys like that? Because I think it's tricky. It's a tough thing.
It's tricky because I'm still trying to figure it out, even with our pieces right now. Because I feel like I've had multiple conversations about guys forcing the issue. And when you're a high profile player, there's expectation to score goals, to get assists, to be the top guy, and you can see it at times where guys are forcing a shot or forcing a pass, and it's not the right moment. And it's probably pressure building up. It's probably, the expectations from them internally and then, externally. But my job as a manager and as a leader is to help these guys understand that I'm going to trust them, even if they're not scoring goals, even if they're not getting assists. I'm going to expect them to make decisions that are the best for our team. And when I see that go in the wrong direction, that's when I pull guys aside and I'll show them, or I'll just talk to them about right now, you're trying desperately to impact the game in ways where, we're going to talk about your name. But if you just play your role and with your talent, if you simplify things, the production's going to be there. Your individual performance is going to help the collective. And that's tough sometimes because guys, 3 games, 4 games, 5 games go on and you haven't scored, you haven't had an assist. And when the team's winning, for some people they're ecstatic, but for others they're like, man, I'm not contributing the way I expected to. And that's, that's what I think top players, that's why they get to that point, is because they're consistently contributing to the team's success. And so my job's to manage that and let guys know that, the production will come, but once you start changing the way you play and once you make decisions to think about your own production, the team will suffer and you will suffer. And so it's just trying to observe, to analyze it, and then to make sure that the conversations happen at the right time, to make sure these guys, stay focused on the fact that this is not an individual sport. You are part of the team, and you lose sight of that, the game becomes very difficult, and your production and the way you help the team, it's affected. And so I'm still trying to, it's an ongoing process. Every year with every group of players that we have, you're always trying to find that balance and make sure that guys understand their role, whether it's the DP, whether it's the homegrown player. Because every you hear it all the time. Every piece comes into play.
Right.
Whether you're a starter or not, you're pushing guys in training. I mean, we've all three of us have been in those positions before, as a starter, as a reserve. But how do you accept that role, and how do you continue to do what you're best at? It's also up to us as coaches to put them in a position to succeed. So how do we deploy them, and how do we piece these things together so that their strengths come out? And like we talked about with Orishano, we've been depleted in the attack, and I've put him in a position that is not his best. And it's trying to find our best team with our best players, maybe. And, that I think he suffered because of that in some ways. And so, I'm still trying to figure that out too, because it's not always like for like when you're missing a bunch of pieces with the group that we have.
Right. Where does Cincinnati fall within the Eastern Conference? We've talked a bunch about the Eastern Conference. You guys, I thought, used to have a pretty significant rivalry with Philly, right? Because you came from Philly, Jim was still there. Now he's not there, but what Bradley's doing in Philly is obviously pretty impressive. They don't seem like the team that at least I was expecting to see. I didn't think that they were going to be as dangerous as they are, especially moving some of the things that they've moving Gazdag to Columbus. Is the rivalry with Columbus kind of where you guys target because of what Nancy's done, what their success has been? Miami in the most obvious ways. You bring Berhalter into Chicago. There's a lot that's circling around Cincinnati, and you guys are still doing the business. Where do you?
I want to take it a step further, Pat. Is this the most competitive Eastern Conference ever? I mean, seriously, there are 7 teams in the East who I see who finish in the top 4. And the quality, it's just like the quality from top to bottom on all these teams on any given day. It's hard to see where it's going to shake out because it's so competitive.
It feels like every year we're saying the same thing about how competitive, the conference is. I mean, I don't go into any game feeling comfortable. So every team feels threatening. Every team feels like a huge challenge in front of us. Certainly there was investment into, some teams that, raised some eyebrows in the offseason, obviously with Atlanta, with Charlotte. I'm only going to name a few, but, I think from where we're at the top. I don't know all the points right now, but to where whoever the playoff, 9th team is, it's probably 4 or 5 points if I'm guessing. Yeah. And that just shows you it's still too early, but it is a very competitive conference. It's tricky because I felt this way last year. I felt this way, in 23 and 22, where there's 8 or 9 teams that you feel like can go and win the conference. Yeah. And so obviously Miami's very strong. We mentioned Columbus, and I'll go to the rivalry question. I think we force too many rivalry conversations. Yeah. You're right. The FCC Columbus one is real, and I came into that, and then you felt it, you saw it on game day with what it meant to the fan base,
which was one of those Philly ones where it felt organic. It felt like this just kind of happened because of the staff moves really more than anything else. Correct.
But with where we were as a club and where Columbus was, we were both having success. So that also aids in this feeling a little bit more. And both teams were at the top of the league over the last couple of years. So that plays a part in how you're being talked about going into a rivalry game where we're not last place in the conference. Both teams were towards the top. With Philly, it was myself, Chris, some of our players' previous relationship and time spent in Philly. So,
Right.
And then of course we were playing in the playoffs. So
Right.
we were playing in meaningful games as well at the end of the year. So,
Right.
that helped for those games to feel a little bit different. But we've talked about the Nashville rivalry, and now you're talking about Chicago. These rivalries take time.
Yeah.
They take us, the same group of players and coaches being around each other and having memorable games and matchups. And so I tend to be a little bit more hesitant when we talk about the rivalry stuff.
And to be fair, Pat, you were also part of probably two of the most iconic rivalries in the history of this league, in New England, Chicago, and New England, Houston. Like those were like, when I think of rivalries in this league, those have to be two of the top five.
Yeah, but I was also in Seattle when we were playing Portland as a player, and I was, LA, San Jose for a stretch there. And I know it's kind of changed with, LAFC coming into play. Like I've seen rivalries that are different. And, I know you mentioned in our New England days, it was, yes, I think it was a product of the successful teams and memorable games, specifically in playoffs, that helped to,
elevate that passion, right? That temperature.
So the Columbus rivalry is real. I felt it, since day one, and the way people within the organization talk about how they feel, about Columbus, and so you're trying to get up to speed with that. And then what I just try to message to the players in those moments is understand there's a lot of us that are new to this each year. Understand what it means to the club and to the fans. All right, it might not mean the same yet for you, but you need to understand how to go into this game and show what it means as in your performance. All right, win or lose, you need to understand how to perform and how to compete in this game, because it is different.
I'm sure MLS is absolutely thrilled that the best, most consistently excellent soccer is being played in Ohio. I'm sure that's just thrilling for them, but I digress. Pat, we've talked a lot about Cincinnati, your process, your time. You've been so gracious and open with everything you've said. I promise you I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but I want to take it down. I want to. It's every time you preface a question like that, it's always tricky, right? But
I'm in trouble.
I want to go. I want to go national team. I want to go national team route, because you have experience with the national team as a coach, and you're the guy who you worked under. And Bruce Arena just had some pretty interesting comments, I thought, about his thoughts on what's happening with the national team right now. The Journeymen, we've talked quite a bit about the national team stuff. And I was a part of every single World Cup qualifier in 2017 with you and your staff. And it was, forget about the end result, because that was devastating and everybody knows what happened. But the process and the vibes that you and your staff created in that team, it was one of the best years of my life up until the end, up until we didn't qualify. And I think it's because of the atmosphere you guys created. And I think it's because of the pride I always felt in representing the national team. That was the absolute pinnacle for me, And I didn't even play that much. I played one World Cup qualifier in my hometown of Orlando, and I'll never forget it because it was amazing. And I've been critical of the players and about me questioning whether, now that they're all in Europe and playing at the highest possible level in the Champions League, how much it really means to them. Bruce's comments were more on the coaching side of things. We'll get you out of here on this, but just as a guy who we consider a really even-keeled, thoughtful guy, what do you make of what's going on with the national team right now, leading a year out from the World Cup?
Yeah. Well, first, I appreciate the comments on 17, because, like you said, the end result was a tough time for me. That was probably the lowest point of my soccer career, was being a part of, the failure, because that's what it was. But you learn from it, you grow from it. It motivated me in ways that I wasn't expecting, but it was tough. And you were an important piece to that. And despite us coming up short, I do think that group had a good vibe. And that's what makes it disappointing, is because there was a lot of good characters in that locker room, throughout that, 8-month process, I guess, if you will, 6 to 8 month process.
Yeah.
But the national team is a different beast. And what I will say is that experience showed me how much I miss coaching. I'm going to go a different route, and then I'll go to, the question. But it's almost you become a scout. You're scouting the player pool. You're scouting the opponent, but you're not coaching. You're on the field for a couple days leading up to, the two games within that window, typically outside of, like a Gold Cup. But you don't get to coach, and I missed it. And that part was difficult for me because it is a totally different beast. And so I think when you hear criticism and when you see the national team struggle, our national team, any national team, what I'll continue to defend with those coaches or, those players is they're in totally different environments with different playing styles, with different coaches. And then you're bringing it all together and you're trying to get that work in a short amount of time. Now I understand it's a process from 22 to 26. What's the path? What's our player pool from the beginning? Who's being added as you go through it? What's the coaching staff? There was setbacks certainly with that as far as, how we have moved forward over the last 4 years. And so, I know Bruce, I think his comments were, about having an American coach that understands the American player and the culture. I like winning coaches that understand how to motivate a team to go and win in tournament play, which is what this is. How are you preparing this team to go and have success in a World Cup? Where this is tricky is you didn't have to qualify. Yeah. And so what are the meaningful games leading up to it to prepare you, which you lose some of that in our path to 26. But I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And, Pochettino is a pretty big name that has had success that, I think can prepare these guys in a way where we have a successful World Cup. But every time there's a setback, every time you have a camp that doesn't get the results, and especially against competition where you're expected to win, there's going to be doubt. That's natural. And so I'll be optimistic and say, despite some of the struggles that we've seen, I'm excited about, this group. But I will say, when you talk about the players and if we're talking about, being critical, it's not just about, the coach and the staff. What does it mean for these players when they put on that jersey? What did it mean for you when you put on that jersey to go and compete for your country? And sometimes you look at the game and you look at how it's evolved, and it's so much about tactics and X's and O's that I think we've lost sight of the fact that what has made us so competitive and so strong in the past is just a desire and the way we compete. Yeah. Forget the style of play. Yeah. When guys put on the jersey, they gave everything. They knew how to compete. And sometimes you don't see that with players. And that's where I think some of us previous players, previous coaches, fans look at, the current group and get frustrated because sometimes you don't see that because it becomes so much about the style of play. It's like, no, you're on the road in Honduras. You're on the road in Costa Rica. Who cares how it looks? And you can't build because guess what? The field doesn't look great and there's risk. And your opponent knows how to compete and make things difficult. You have to adapt and you have to understand how to find success in these moments. And you have to understand how to compete always. And sometimes you don't see that. And that's where I think, some of, the past players and coaches and fans of the game and of the national team get frustrated. So,
do you feel like, Pat, the comprehension of these frustrations is really at a valid point to be critical of these guys?
Yeah, of course.
You think so?
Of course.
Look,
they're going to lose games. They're going to lose games. And, you're not, like I said, it's hard to get all of these players to come in and look like a team in a short amount of time. I know they've spent enough time together over the years, but if that's not going well, at a minimum, what you want to see is, okay, things aren't going our way. We're not playing particularly well, but how are they competing? How do they go into tackles? Yeah. All right. How do they stick up for each other on the field? All right. When an opponent has put one of your teammates on the ground,
Sure,
Those
sure.
are in those moments, that's when you want to see.
And so you're talking about
player,
character moments, not soccer moments.
not soccer. This is character moments because
Totally.
Yeah.
let's be honest, CONCACAF is a lot of character moments.
Yep,
It's a
100%.
lot of character moments.
I guess like I just where I go is like, are these guys, and maybe I'm way off base here, but like, are these guys, do they have enough character to hit the moments that we're asking them to hit in what I think we all probably agree on, and maybe this is an oversimplification, but the meaningless games. Like, we're playing a lot of meaningless soccer for the national team right now because we don't have to qualify, and because we're playing games, and like I said, it's an oversimplification, so take it for what it is. But they're not the same type of games that you guys are specifically talking about in going through this build-up, where you actually have to hit a goal, and you're asking a more accomplished, more talented, but more accomplished group of players that play in massive games, with massive implications on a weekly basis outside of this country, and bringing them into a SoFi where there's 6,000 people there, and it really doesn't matter. And it's not inspiring whatsoever. And then we say, well, why the hell don't these guys care? And I think about these like moments where we as players, because I've been trying to conceptualize this, and how can I connect this to my minuscule brain here, where I know that going into like a preseason trip for where we play in some bullshit exhibition in Las Vegas where there's 1,300 people there, and the game is against another team that probably cares a lot more than we need to care, and we don't maybe have the same type of mentality that we need. Does that translate at all? Like, are we able to really be in a position to say, like, Weston McKennie, who plays for Juventus and gets meaningful minutes on a daily basis, isn't character filled to be able to represent the United States of America?
There's a select group of players that they're shoo-ins. You know that they're going to be there. And I say select. I don't know what that number is. I'm not going to go through them, but call it 10 guys.
Yeah.
If players are going into a national team camp with this idea that they don't need to compete, and you said, like, and I'll use your words, like, these aren't meaningful games. But for those players, you better believe they're meaningful. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. You're trying to make a World Cup team.
Are you talking about for the 10 or for the below?
Below.
Okay.
For those guys, if you're approaching that game, and I would say for the 10 too, but there's certain guys that you just know they're going to be there. For the rest of them, if you take that approach into that camp, if you're playing a team that's, it's not your Brazils and your Germanys and your Mexico, if you're just talking about our CONCACAF rivalry game, that's a scary thought to think that anybody would take that approach. And I'm not saying they are, but every time that you go into a camp as a player at this stage leading up to a World Cup, you better be approaching that camp as if, like, I need to show myself in the best possible way, or I might lose an opportunity, because that's how deep our player pool is. There's a lot of talented players, and if they hit the right form in this next year leading up to it, well, they're making that team. And there's going to be a lot of talented players that don't, because potentially they're going into these games without the right mindset. Again, I'm not saying that's the case, but there's only a select group of players that they're going to be there, even if their form is a little bit poor going into it, with their club team. So,
I just think like in this copycat culture that we live in, if the 10 that are showing up are somewhat above it, right? Like we talked about Denke and his professionalism and how that bleeds into the team, or Lucho and where he gets mentally and emotionally and how that bleeds into the team. If that's kind of the people that you're watching, and you're watching the way that they approach these games, doesn't it kind of rationally translate to the rest of the group, or am I just missing it?
No, I would hope that those, the Christians of the world, the Westons of the world, when they go into the camp with the form that they're in with their clubs, I would hope that their play and their demeanor carries over in a way where they're leaders in that group, and they're leading by example, and they're not taking their foot off the gas and saying, I'm great with with our clubs right now, with Milan, with Juve. I'm coming into this national team camp, and I'm going to continue that form, and I'm going to help lead the rest of the team with the same form, with an amazing mentality and leadership approach to get the best out of the group in those moments. I would hope that you don't take your foot off the gas because you're going into a national team camp and you're a shoo-in to play in a World Cup. But again, I can't speak to those things.
Yeah, and me
I just
neither.
think it's so valuable. I mean, Dax, we could talk about 17, like the most important pieces going into it. All right, how were those guys when it was the lead up to Trinidad, which again we came up short, but in Panama, in Orlando, in some of these games, that was so important for the role player, the U's of the world going into those camps, and so our best players need to be the best players. And I don't want to say the best leaders because not all of the best players are the best leaders, but they need to go into that and lead the best possible way, whether that's their on-field play or how they communicate and how they speak and how they lead off the field.
Mm-hmm.
Well said, man. That's well said, because that's what we need in the national team. And look, I tend to agree with you. This has been a really trying time for the national team, but there is a part of me that thinks that Pochettino, with his experience and his quality, that he'll get it right and that we will be pleasantly surprised and pleased with our performance in the World Cup. At least that's my optimistic take. This has been honestly a fantastic conversation. Gargs, I don't know, you tell me, I would put this right up there with Pablo. You're not talking about ayahuasca.
Bob's is one of a kind, man.
You're not talking about like retreats and stuff, but I will say the detail that you give us in terms of your team and what your expectations are is top. And this has been fantastic. I do want to get you out here on this. Have you had to rein in my good friend Brian Anunga and tell him to stop kicking Evander in training?
He can't help himself, man. That's what makes him tick. You see it from like day one. He'll go into tackle and you'll be like,
don't do that,
Brian, just understand, it's Tuesday and this guy's really important. I understand that this is the only way but there's been a couple of those moments. But this is like Obi for us, and Brian, but he is a great leader. He's been such a key piece for our team and being in the position we're in. I got so much time for him. He's been a great addition, and he goes about it the right way every single day with humility, with putting his head down and working. And so I'll tell him that we chatted, and that you're telling him.
Tell him I said hi, and that one of the reasons I retired was so that I didn't have to meet him twice a year play against him again in Cincinnati. But no, man, honestly, for me, such a pleasure watching you coach and watching your teams play. Please give Kenny and Dom and the rest of your staff all of our best. And then I'm excited to watch you guys finish out the season.
Thanks, Dax. Sorry.
Love you, Dad.
Love you, Dad.
All right, Nunes, we'll get you out of here on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're the man. Good luck. Keep going and introducing all the players and into your system. And I would say do more winning, but you guys have that figured out. So maybe it's just the style. So
by the way, I guess Gordo thought we were talking about 4 p.m. Pacific Coast time. So
he's hopping on. He's hopping on here shortly.
He's about to join us here in just a moment. I guess my bet was lost, as those tend to do. That's why I don't bet. Nunes, thanks very much. Good luck on the weekend, and we'll see you out there soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Journeymen, we're out.